A surge in populist politics has seen the rise of Donald Trump and right-wing parties in Europe. Is populism becoming a new world order, or is it an ideology that has had its day? This is Roundtable with me, David Foster. Saving ordinary people from the privileged elite. Populism positions itself as the answer to a disgruntled nation's problems. 2016 seeing the start of a wave of populist politics. Voters in a number of democracies, unhappy it appears with the status quo, were convinced by the arguments. For some, populism is a chance to change the system. For others, it is divisive and dangerous.
2016. The year politics and predictability went their separate ways.
Build the wall. They will.
Right-wing populist sentiment spread across the globe. And then this moment.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The world's largest economy voted in Donald Trump on a wave of anti-elite sentiment. In Europe, too, the right was gaining momentum.
What is happening in Holland, what will happen in France, in Austria, in Germany, and all the other countries where our elections are indeed very important.
Dare to dream that the dawn is breaking on an independent, united kingdom.
J'appelle tous les patriotes à nous rejoindre afin de participer au combat politique décisif.
But another year, another political lurch. So far, the historic victories on the far right have not been repeated in 2017. Some say the centrists are fighting back. This year's biggest test came in France. Marine Le Pen's far-right Front National made it to the final runoff in the French presidential race. But she lost out to Emmanuel Macron. The former finance minister's new party, En Marche, won on a centrist pro-EU platform. And in the UK, a political comeback like no other. Labour's Jeremy Corbyn has gone from political outsider to potential Prime Minister. And despite a modest improvement, Donald Trump's approval ratings in the US have been poor. One poll says 54% of Americans think he's not fit for the role. Was 2016's surge in far-right populist sentiment just a flash in the pan? Or does it continue to linger in opposition politics and beyond? June 24th, 2016. The day the UK awoke to the news that 17 million Britons had voted to leave the European Union, a move many said was a rejection of the establishment. Austerity, growing terrorism fears and anger against the liberal elite led to a flourishing of populist movements headed by charismatic figures. None captured the world's attention more than the so-called leader of the free world, Donald Trump.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
These ideas about solving the problems of the country, if we just do this and we just do that, and if we build a wall, that we can solve immigration, that if we raise tariffs we can protect jobs. Very simple solutions that seem to cut through. "2017 may have seen a leftward swing of the political pendulum.
populists failed to break through in the UK election.
It's easy to sell a message of just vote for me and I'll make it right, but actually they crash up against the reality of modern life, which is that it is complicated, and if we did have simple solutions, we would have tried them.
And it may continue. Angela Merkel's Christian Democrat Union Party is expected to win in Germany's September federal election. But the rise of far-right populism remains not far from the surface in Germany, where the right-wing nationalist AfD has gained ground in recent years. Despite its recent losses on the main stage, right-wing populism has flexed its political muscle against the establishment and become ingrained in many democracies, changing the shape of politics, present and future.
So is populism right, left, even centre continuing to gain ground, or is it just a flash in the pan? Let's talk about that. At the Roundtable today, Natasha Ezra from the University of Essex, who's writing a book called Democracies and Autocracies. To my right is the human rights and anti-racism campaigner Lee Jasper. Immediately to my left, Mika Mosbacher, who was part of the Trump campaign, and Andre Walker, a journalist who helped set up the London arm of the right-wing American website Breitbart. Welcome to you all. Mika, let me start with you first of all. We heard Donald Trump in that reporter's package just there, talking about a lot of things which were exaggerated, to say the very least. You know, he hasn't got a ban on all Muslims coming, etc., etc. So
Campaign rhetoric.
Do you need to be an opportunist to be a populist leader?
No, you need to be a good salesman, because remember, the election in the United States was not about logic, it was emotions. So every good salesman knows that you need to play on the emotions to inspire people. And that was easy to do because there was a set of circumstances in the U.S. that was simmering beneath the surface. For example, Americans felt left behind. Small businesses had felt choked by regulations. Individuals felt like their wages were staying stagnant. On top of that, Obama had a globalist vision rather than a so-called nationalist vision. For example, he failed to draw a red line in North Korea. He reached out to Iran with what many Americans considered a ransom. He seemed to be appeasing enemies. And so there was a soul-searching going on within the Republican Party. I was so-called establishment, for example.
So is it, for example, blue-collar, what we call working class in this country, felt left down by their traditional leaders, i.e. the socialist left and the left-wing parties, and turned to something where they could see immediate action?
Well, I think the labels of socialist and left, you know, need to be qualified when we're talking about Britain, essentially. Because I think that people, you know, there's very much a sort of a neoliberal consensus around politics, British politics, over the post-war period up until very recently, which meant that in the late, after the election of Blair, there was very little difference between the main parties on substantive policy issues. And I think that the overwhelming response to that is that politicians are all the same, and therefore people hanker for a new vision, somebody that they believe can strike a blow for them and protect their interests. And economic decline in Western nations always produces, in my experience, a shift to the right. It's a naive assumption.
I was going to ask Natasha about that. Does it inevitably have to be a shift to the right?
No, not always, because populism, in terms of like left-wing populism, is what really dominated Latin American politics. When you see the rise of Chavez and Correa and Morales in Bolivia and Ecuador and Venezuela. Often it is to the left. In fact, academically speaking, we mostly focus on left-wing populism. But what's going on in Europe has been a big rise of populist right-wing parties. And in fact, in terms of their vote share in the last 40, 50 years, it's tripled in terms of the number of seats. And that's why we're probably focusing more on this right-wing form of populism right now.
Does it inevitably lead to some form of authoritarian rule?
Well, I don't think so. I think the big problem that we've had, certainly in Europe, for the past few years, is that we don't live in a democratic system because of the European Union. Whichever way you vote, nothing ever changes, particularly in local government, absolutely nothing ever changes. 75% of our laws are made from Brussels, so people feel disengaged. You know, we've created almost a huge Yugoslavia, just as undemocratic and just as crazily diverse. And people want to feel like they can make a difference. And therefore, things like Brexit and Trump do that. And I think there is an inherent danger with forcing people to all agree with each other. I mean, for years, Andrew Breitbart himself once said that one of the big problems that we have is that anybody who disagrees with, say, uncontrolled immigration is immediately labelled racist. And political correctness is a way of hammering people down and preventing free speech and preventing genuine debate.
Feel free to kick in at any time, anybody, but I do have one question for all of you. Do populist leaders make a difference, or do they just fade away given time?
They make a difference if they have solutions. You know, if you look back at the old definition of populism, it was playing to the crowds. It was telling them, you know, it's uniting them against a common enemy. But they didn't necessarily have a solution. In Donald Trump's case, he's had solutions, very real business solutions to some of the problems in our country.
Isn't the actual issue
They
here?
almost never have solutions. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Almost never. I mean,
It's a
even I
vacuous
can even
policy.
criticize on the left side where Chavez made some improvements for the poor, but in the end, you know,
Destroyed the
poverty
country.
rate. But in
they
the right,
rumbled him,
almost
didn't they, in the
never.
end?
On the right, it's almost worse. And actually, 40% of all the cases of authoritarian backsliding have been due to populist leadership.
But hang on, isn't populism an allergic reaction to unpopularism? I mean, if you look at one thing that possibly a lot of us do agree on, you know, this soup of majorism and blurrism, that, you know, it's all just the same thing. Whatever happens, we're just going to keep public spending at the same level. We're going to have the same policies. I mean, we're being told in Europe that we absolutely must have uncontrolled immigration. We must empty Syria. We must empty Libya. And if you attempt to disagree with that, then somehow, it's impossible to shut the borders. But when you come to somebody like Donald Trump and you come to someone like Nigel Farage, they turn around and say, look, there is a simple solution to uncontrolled immigration. Shut the border. It's easy to do.
I think that's part of the
Exactly.
problematic narrative. I think that, you know, the right-wing shifts tend to adopt a scapegoating methodology for explaining the problems that ordinary people face. And so people are misguided in a
But the
solution.
shortage of housing must be the increase in population, surely.
But that's a political issue.
Yeah, but it doesn't make them a
relates
scapegoat.
That relates to Margaret Thatcher selling off vast quantities of social
The
housing.
houses weren't demolished, Lee.
No, they're not
The houses weren't
demolished,
demolished.
but they're not
There's more
available.
houses
They're
now.
not available for the poor.
Natasha,
And they're not affordable.
In your book, which is coming out this autumn, I believe, Democracies and Autocracies, what have you discovered?
In general, democracy is under threat. You know, there's some improvements in certain countries where we see improvements in Burma and Tunisia, but in general, there's a backsliding. And actually, the most dangerous backsliding is taking place in the West, in Western countries. And if we just take a look at Trump, he's systematically going after our democratic institutions in the U.S. and he's going after the media. He's doing literally the same thing that Chavez did, where he delegitimized the media, went after it, tried to act as if anything that the media says is fake news. And then, you know, his followers will believe that. And then that means that there isn't really an effective check on the government when this happens.
Well, I, of course, disagree being an American because if you look back, the Constitution is the ultimate platform for populism. It starts out, we the people, government, we the people, by the people, for the people. So
But you got the best money. You got the best democracy.
But then you
money
have to
combined.
defend freedom of
That's the
speech.
part of the
we are
problem.
not under threat.
But, you know, you have to
Under
defend
threat
freedom of
is
speech, though.
establishment, the elite, corrupt establishment.
No, but he's going after the First Amendment when he goes after the
you
media.
can't afford ordinary
he's
people.
challenging journalists, and
Micah.
I happen to agree with some of it because he's challenging journalists who are coming out without having a viable source. They haven't been fact-checking. Look at CNN.
But he himself never has viable
You have
sources.
a corporate
He
democracy.
doesn't have viable
You have
sources
the best democracy that a billionaire can buy. And that's the really perverse factor in all of this. That both in the United Kingdom and in America, it is your capital asset wealth that determines
There
the
are a
extent to
number of-
which that you can entry into politics and seek unfair advantage over the
I
rest.
used to work for Steve Bannon, who's one of the most senior people in the White House now. And when we established Breitbart London, me, him, and a couple of other people, what he said is, isn't it crazy in America that people go down to the ballot box, vote Republican, and the people that go to Washington actually don't represent the views of their voters? And he said the Tea Party was a real effort to try and actually get people who represented the voters that elected them. Now, whatever you think of Donald Trump, he has won a primary. He is somebody who genuinely represents the voters.
He didn't win the popular vote. He didn't win the popular
Well, that's
vote.
their system.
Yeah, absolutely. I accept it's their
Can I please
system.
put this
But
thought out
he
there?
didn't get as many votes as Hillary Clinton.
I was asking in the introduction. Pardon me.
College
Asking in the introduction whether right-wing populism is dead. You seem to think that it's a danger at the moment. You've said it's an ever-present danger. So what would end it?
What would end it? Well, I mean, I think that the problem is there has been a weakening of class-based parties, and sort of what had already been said is that working class people, their interests have not been represented. Parties weren't representing them, people weren't listening to them, people weren't hearing them. And what would
Which
really
in essence
end
is
it,
what these two were
yeah,
saying.
is that labor parties or parties that cater towards these types of working class groups, have to really pay attention to the interests of these people. But this is the thing: is that the right-wing groups don't really care about the interests of the poor and of the working class, because if you look at the healthcare plan in the U.S., and where you're going to have over 20 million people that are not going to have health insurance, that's not really going to help them. I mean, in some of the poorest states in the U.S., where healthcare is really under threat there, those were voters that voted for Trump. And they can be the same. No, but the same voters that vote.
Obamacare, I have no health care. My premiums went up to the point, they went up almost 75% at the end of 2017. I could buy a small car, $27,500 out of my pocket. So the sort of one-size-fits-all health care bill, where I'm required to pay for maternity leave at my age, is laughable. I don't need it. I want an a la carte selection process, a free market process, where I can choose what I need to fit my particular needs and still have something in the U.S. that can provide for those who can't.
How has the world changed? Because this is the context of it all, isn't it? Your late husband in the late 80s was part of George Bush Sr.'s team in Washington, Commerce Secretary. I happen to be working there at the same time. I want to know how much America's changed to bring about this kind of revolution. No,
I don't think America's...
How much has Europe changed, the world changed?
I think that what you're seeing, in my view, is a realignment of global economic power that has been coming for some time with the rise of China, with the rise of India. And I think there's a sort of a deep, profound melancholia amongst particularly white men of a certain age who hanker back for the great days of making America great again, the great days of empire, and feel a sort of, a real push to recapture those historic glories of the past. And I think it's a functional and dysfunctional failure of a response to a new global economic order, which is not seeing America and Europe in their historic positions.
See, this is the problem with the left that I think is the reason that people are so angry. I mean, if you look at what Lee said, there is almost a comma there, which is, and we are happy with the rise of China and the rise of India. We are happy to be replaced as global leaders.
Don't put words in my mouth. Don't put words in my mouth.
Look,
I didn't say
the truth of the matter is, there are a group of people, and I think a very large group of people, who actually say, yes, there is a rise in China, yes, there is a rise in India, but you know what? We want to continue to rise as well. And we don't want to simply say, this is the end of the Anglosphere.
Would you
this is not the end of the
Anglosphere. You can't recapture the past.
Yes, I think you can. Oh, yes, you can. Oh, yes, you can.
I know you believe
yes, you can.
I know you believe that.
Oh, yes, you can.
Would you all agree, or would you disagree, that right-wing populism is regarded in a more distasteful way in many ways than left-wing?
Well, it has a xenophobic, character to it. And that is what gets it in trouble, because there are some parties that say things that, really divisive, really polarizing, really exclusive. Left-wing populism was a little bit more inclusive, and the target was more sort of like Western imperialism. The right-wing populism is really characterized by trying to get back to that native group that was born in that particular country, and they were very, very
nation.
Yeah, very into a pure form of whatever.
Absolute rubbish.
To opportunists leading these movements.
Yeah, they take advantage of it.
Well, every good politician.
And the more extreme they are, perhaps.
No, I don't think so. And I think you've got to bear in mind these typical comments, which is everybody on the populist right is a racist. We're used to it now. It doesn't particularly worry us. In fact, actually, I take the view that if they're shouting that at you, you're starting to beat them, which is an important thing.
You're as far removed as a racist as anybody I know. So let me just put that on the table. But that doesn't excuse the sort of huge explosion of hate crime, of Brexit almost being seen to give a green light to people who've got the most obnoxious views. And what I don't see, and here's my problem in Britain at the moment, if we're going to make a success of Brexit, what it will require is right-wing centrists to disassociate themselves. To disassociate themselves, as you decided to do at China, from those elements within them that are avowedly and ideologically racist. And they're not doing that.
If you want to protect liberalism in this country, freedom, free speech, you have got to stop hundreds of thousands of people coming from the third world. Why is it that homophobic hate crime?
European.
Why is it?
It's not true that
homophobic hate crime?
Why are you lying?
Why is homophobic hate crime increasing in Tower Hamlets?
You know,
Commonwealth,
both of you.
Commonwealth,
because I want to
immigration
bring this back to
has
a
stopped.
sensible discussion.
You know that, and I know
Nonsense.
that. Eastern Europeans, they look like you, mate, not me.
1 second, please. Yeah. I want to bring this back to the point that we were making at the very beginning, which is, has it died? Has it had its day?
Right-wing populism.
No, not at all. And what I want to bring out too,
and pervasive phenomena. I think that the cultural
Look at what happened in Europe with Macron.
He got 34% of the vote, so it's not dead. It could be simmering beneath the surface. And if you look at the Netherlands, look at Wilders. While he came in second, it was a close second.
There's no room for complacency.
You cannot put, as he said, the genie back in the bottle.
But what are the centre-right doing to the Front National?
It's never going to fully go away. It may have lost, in some cases, the majority in some countries, but it still is getting about 15 to 20% of the votes. And the real issue is that it pushes these other right-wing parties way more to the right than they normally would be, and that is the danger. They act as a kingmaker.
For once in this program, I'm going to ask you to speak one at a time. I'll wait for the other person to finish. So let me start with you, Lee, and ask you where you think the world is changing because of what we've seen in the last few years.
Well, I do think that, as I said earlier, I do think the profound shifts in the economic order with the rise of other countries other than the West is having a profound effect. I do think there's a hankering from the right for a recapture of past glories. I do think that the economics of the situation are such that the right are scapegoating vulnerable minorities, and I think that as a consequence of that, hate crime, racism, division, we're a country that is more divided after Brexit than we've ever been since our post-war history, poses extremely challenging and troubled times for us.
I'm going to come to you at the end, Micah, because there's something you said that I would like to bring up to wrap up the programme. Andre.
Well, I think that firstly, we're reclaiming our democracy back. I mean, when you see people on the television, Keir Starmer and all the sort of anti-Brexit brigade, they're saying, how can we lose this greatness that we've got through the European Union? Look, I'm from Lee in Greater Manchester. You go to a town like Lee, and this economic miracle that people are talking about simply hasn't happened. You know, the world is not great at the moment. People are not getting what they want, and people feel that they're disengaged with the process. And what Brexit does is forces our national leaders to stop scapegoating Brussels and blaming them for all the policies. But actually, it's about reclaiming democracy. It's about saying to elected representatives, you know what, you've got to go to Westminster and do what you're damn well told.
Is there anything, Natasha,
good luck with that,
democratic in the broader sense about a right-wing populist movement?
Just talk about populism in general, that it really erodes democratic institutions. It's not good for democracy at all. It has this facade of participation and referendums, and that's just basically to legitimize a style of leadership that really wants to do away with institutions, term limits, and these other nuisances that democracy is all about. It doesn't really want compromise and negotiation and accommodation. You know, they really try to tap into this style of leadership that is very charismatic, that really appeals to people in their weakest moments, and you know, then they validate all this stuff through elections.
And are there waves through history?
Yeah,
of these kind of movements. I mean, you could talk about the Nazi Party.
It goes in ups and downs. Yeah, it goes in ups and downs, but it never goes away.
In Europe,
it will never fully go away. It will never fully go away because there is always going to be a need for a charismatic type of leader, and for someone who speaks to people in a simplistic manner, that fights for the common people, people who feel that they are being left out, that their voices aren't being heard.
Mika, let me ask you, I'll put this quote to you. When you were part of the Republican National Committee, I think you were finance co-chair at the time.
Yes, it was.
You said, I have great faith that our country will come back together. Now, does that mean despite Donald Trump or because of Donald Trump?
Because of Donald Trump, because at the very end of the day, the stock market is rallying. It's had record highs, the so-called Trump effect. That affects Democrats as well as Republicans. Additionally, we've added 220,000 jobs in the last couple of months, and unemployment has dropped. That is affecting people at home, people who are struggling to feed their families. Secondly, I think all Americans can agree that many of our trade deals were not in the best interest of our country. NAFTA, TPP, for example.
North American Free Trade and the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Yeah, well, and absolutely. And additionally, if you look at it, the UK, our biggest trading partner. UK direct investment in the United States, over $4 billion, represents over 2 million jobs in the US. Our direct investment in UK, almost $5 billion. So we have, at the end of the day, we have much in common economically. You might disagree
you may
with
well
me.
grunt. You may well.
Well, I do grunt. I do grunt
I've
because
got
I find it frankly, amazing that the economic realities of the world can be dumbed down in a sort of general milieu of a democracy where
And
the
there,
simplest solutions
we must leave it.
are the thing. Europe's on a very
Thank you.
Europe's been saved.
Thank you all very, very
see
much
about that.
indeed. Right, left, centre, many people want to move away from the establishment. Does that mean populism is here to stay? You've got your own ideas, or is it giving rise to a new wave of more moderate politics? Didn't sound like it to me. This has been Roundtable. I'm David Foster, but it's a team effort. From me and all of them, thanks for watching. See you next time.